The clock on my nightstand glowed 11:47 p.m. when I heard the familiar sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs. My heart began its familiar rhythm of terror, that rapid, shallow beating that had become my midnight companion for the past 2 years. Marcus was home, and from the uneven cadence of his steps, I could tell tonight would be one of the bad nights. I pulled my blanket higher, pretending to sleep, hoping against hope that he would pass my room and go straight to bed. But the footsteps stopped outside my door. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. The handle turned slowly, deliberately. Emma? His voice was thick with alcohol and something darker. Get up. I kept my eyes closed, maintaining the charade of sleep. Maybe if I stayed perfectly still, perfectly quiet, he would leave. But Marcus had never been one to give up easily. The light switch clicked on, flooding my small room with harsh fluorescent brightness. I said, "Get up." There was no point in pretending anymore. I sat up slowly, keeping my eyes downcast. I had learned not to look directly at him when he was like this. Eye contact was considered defiance, and defiance meant pain. "Your mother's working another double shift at the hospital," he said, his words slurring slightly. "Convenient, isn't it? Always working when her precious daughter needs her." Mom didn't know. How could I tell her that the man she had married, the man who had promised to love and protect both of us after Dad died, had become our worst nightmare? She worked 60-hour weeks to keep us afloat financially, coming home exhausted and grateful that Marcus was there to help with Emma. If only she knew what his help really entailed. "You left dishes in the sink," Marcus continued, moving closer to my bed. "After I specifically told you to clean the kitchen before bedtime." I had cleaned the kitchen. I always cleaned the kitchen. But Marcus had come home around 10, made himself a sandwich, and left his plate in the sink. I learned long ago that pointing out such discrepancies only made things worse. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'll go clean them now." "No." His hand shot out, gripping my arm with bruising force. "You'll learn to follow instructions the first time." The first blow came without warning, his open palm connecting with my cheek with a sound that seemed to echo in the small room. My head snapped to the side, stars exploding across my vision. Before I could recover, his fist connected with my ribs, driving the air from my lungs. "Please," I gasped, but the word only seemed to fuel his rage. For the next several minutes, though it felt like hours, Marcus unleashed 2 years of accumulated anger and alcohol-fueled violence. I curled into a ball on my bed trying to protect my vital organs as my father had taught me during his brief military training sessions when I was younger. Dad had been in the army before I was born, and he had always emphasized the importance of protecting your core. When it was over, Marcus stood over me, breathing heavily. "Clean up your face and go wash those dishes. And Emma?" He grabbed my chin, forcing me to look at him. "If you ever tell anyone about this, I'll make sure your mother knows what a lying, manipulative little brat she raised. She'll never believe you anyway." Who would believe a troubled teenager over a respected member of the community? He left, closing the door behind him with deliberate gentleness. Another one of his psychological tricks. To anyone listening, it would sound like he had simply checked on his stepdaughter and quietly left her to sleep. I lay on my bed for several minutes, taking inventory of the damage. My left cheek was swelling, and I could taste blood where I had bitten my tongue. My ribs ached with each breath, and I was fairly certain I had a black eye forming. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the crushing weight of helplessness that settled over me. This had been going on for 2 years, ever since Marcus lost his job at the construction company and started drinking heavily. At first, it was just verbal abuse, criticism, insults, threats. Then it escalated to pushing and shoving when Mom wasn't around. Tonight marked a new level of violence, and I knew with sickening certainty that it would only get worse. I had tried telling a teacher once, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had noticed bruises on my arms. But Marcus was smart. He was charming, well-spoken when sober, and had crafted a perfect public persona. He volunteered at the local youth center, attended PTA meetings, and was known throughout our small town as a devoted stepfather who had stepped up to help a widowed mother raise her difficult teenage daughter. When Child Protective Services had visited our home, Marcus had been prepared. He showed them my room, pointed out all the privileges I enjoyed, and spoke sadly about my behavioral issues and tendency towards self-harm and attention-seeking. He had even shown them the knife I kept hidden under my mattress, for protection from him, though I couldn't say that, as evidence of my concerning behavior. The caseworker, a tired-looking woman with too many files and not enough time, had bought his story completely. I was labeled as a troubled teen acting out after losing my father, and Marcus was praised for his patience and dedication. After that, I stopped trying to get help through official channels. But tonight was different. Tonight, something inside me had shifted. As I sat on my bed, tasting blood and fighting back tears of rage rather than fear, I remembered something my father had told me years ago. "Emma," he had said during one of our camping trips, "if you're ever in real danger, I mean life-threatening danger, and you can't get help through normal channels, there are people who will come for you. People who understand what real evil looks like and won't be fooled by charm and lies." At the time, I had thought he was just telling stories. Dad had served in special operations before I was born, though he rarely talked about it. He had a few friends from his military days who would visit occasionally, quiet men with watchful eyes who treated me with surprising gentleness and always called me "little soldier." One of them, Uncle Jake, though he wasn't really my uncle, had given me his phone number when Dad died. "If you ever need anything, Emma, anything at all, day or night." I had kept that number in my phone for 4 years, never using it. But as I sat on my bed at 12:17 a.m., my face throbbing and my spirit finally broken, I realized that this qualified as life-threatening danger. Marcus was escalating, and I knew that one night he might go too far. With shaking fingers, I pulled out my phone and found Uncle Jake's contact. I stared at the number for a long moment, wondering if he would even remember me. It had been 4 years, after all. He probably had his own life, his own problems. But then I heard Marcus downstairs slamming cabinet doors and muttering angrily to himself. He was getting worked up again. Sometimes he came back for round 2. I typed quickly, "Uncle Jake, this is Emma Thompson, Mike's daughter. I'm in trouble. My stepfather is hurting me. I don't know what to do. I'm scared he's going to kill me. Please help." I hesitated for only a moment before hitting send. Then I turned my phone to silent and hid it under my pillow, listening to Marcus's movements downstairs. 3 minutes later, my phone vibrated. I pulled it out carefully, making sure the screen brightness was turned all the way down. "Emma, stay exactly where you are. Lock your door if possible. Help is coming. You did the right thing reaching out. Your dad would be proud." I wanted to cry with relief, but I forced myself to remain quiet. I wedged my desk chair under my door handle. The lock had been removed months ago as punishment for some imagined transgression, and settled back onto my bed to wait. 27 minutes later, I heard vehicles pulling up outside. Not one vehicle, several. I crept to my window and peered through the blinds. 4 black SUVs were parked in our driveway and along the street. Men in tactical gear were taking positions around our house with military precision. This wasn't the police. This was something else entirely. Downstairs, Marcus was shouting, "What the hell is going on? You can't just barge into my house?" A calm, authoritative voice responded. Sir, we're going to need you to step outside with your hands visible. I know my rights. You can't. The voice cut him off. Sir, we are armed federal agents executing a welfare check on a minor. You can step outside voluntarily, or we can assist you. Your choice. I heard scuffling, more shouting from Marcus, and then the sound of the front door opening. Through my window, I watched as Marcus was led outside in handcuffs, his face a mask of confused rage and fear. A few moments later, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Different footsteps. Purposeful, but not threatening. A gentle knock on my door. Emma? My name is Agent Sarah Chen. Jake Morrison sent us. You're safe now. Can you move the chair so we can come up? I moved the chair with trembling hands and opened the door. Agent Chen was a woman in her 30s, dressed in tactical gear but with kind eyes. Behind her stood Uncle Jake, looking exactly as I remembered him, but with deeper lines around his eyes. Hey there, little soldier, he said softly. Sorry it took us so long to get here. I broke down then, 4 years of suppressed fear and pain pouring out in ugly, desperate sobs. Agent Chen immediately knelt beside me, her trained eyes taking in my injuries with professional assessment. We need to get you to a hospital, she said, and we need to take photos of your injuries for evidence. Is that okay? I nodded, unable to speak. Emma, Uncle Jake said, sitting on the edge of my bed. I need you to know that Marcus will never hurt you again. We've been investigating him for the past hour, ever since you texted me. Did you know he's wanted in 2 other states for domestic violence? He's been using false identities. I stared at him. What? Agent Chen pulled out a tablet, showing me several mugshots. Marcus Williams, Marcus Walsh, Mark Wilson. He's a predator who specifically targets widowed mothers with teenage daughters. Your mother wasn't his first victim, Emma. But if you hadn't been brave enough to reach out tonight, you might not have been his last. The next few hours passed in a blur. I was taken to the hospital, where doctors documented my injuries and took photographs. A kind nurse named Patricia stayed with me the entire time, explaining each step of the process and making sure I was comfortable. Uncle Jake called my mother, who rushed home from the hospital in a panic. When she saw me, saw the evidence of what had been happening in her own home while she worked to provide for us, she collapsed into a chair and cried harder than I had ever seen her cry. I'm so sorry, Emma, she kept saying. I should have known. I should have seen the signs. I'm so sorry. But I wasn't angry with her. How could she have known? Marcus had been careful, manipulative. He had isolated me from my friends, convinced teachers that I was troubled, and made sure that Mom was always too exhausted to notice the subtle changes in my behavior. Agent Chen explained that Marcus, whose real name turned out to be Martin Wojcik, was part of an FBI investigation into a network of domestic abusers who used online dating sites to target vulnerable women. My text to Uncle Jake had provided the final piece of evidence they needed to move in. Your father served with some very dedicated people, Agent Chen told me as dawn broke outside my hospital window. When Jake got your message, he called in every favor he had. We had a tactical team mobilized and heading to your location within 15 minutes. But why? I asked. I'm nobody special. Uncle Jake took my hand gently. Your father saved my life in Afghanistan, Emma. More than once. He talked about you constantly, showed pictures, told stories. He loved you more than life itself. When he died, I promised him I would watch out for you. I should have checked on you sooner. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. The legal proceedings that followed were swift. Martin, was charged with aggravated domestic violence, child abuse, fraud, and a dozen other charges related to his activities in other states. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his court-appointed attorney advised him to accept a plea deal. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. During the trial, 3 other women came forward with similar stories. All widows, all with teenage children, all targeted by Martin's careful manipulation. One woman's son had ended up in the hospital with a concussion. Another had lost her savings to Martin's gambling addiction. But they were all safe now, and Martin would never hurt another family. The hardest part wasn't the legal proceedings or even the physical recovery from my injuries. It was learning to trust again, learning that not all authority figures would dismiss my concerns, and learning that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness. Mom and I started family therapy, working through our guilt and trauma with a counselor who specialized in domestic violence cases. Mom blamed herself for bringing Martin into our lives, for working so much that she missed the signs. I blame myself for not speaking up sooner. But slowly, we learned to forgive ourselves and focus on healing. I also started seeing a therapist individually, a former military psychologist who understood the unique trauma of living under constant threat. She helped me understand that my hypervigilance, my trouble sleeping, and my difficulty concentrating weren't character flaws. They were normal responses to an abnormal situation. 6 months after that midnight rescue, I stood in Uncle Jake's backyard at a barbecue with several of his military friends and their families. These were men and women who had seen real evil in the world, who understood the difference between a troubled teenager acting out and a child crying for help. "You know what I'm most proud of?" Uncle Jake asked me as we watched Agent Chen's kids play on a swing set he had built. "What?" "You never gave up. You survived 2 years of hell, and when you finally had the chance to reach out for help, you took it. That takes real courage, Emma. Your dad would be incredibly proud." I thought about that as I watched the children play, their laughter echoing across the yard. For 2 years, I had felt powerless, convinced that no one would believe me or help me. But I had been wrong. There were people who cared, people who would move heaven and earth to protect a child in danger. All I had to do was ask. That night, as Mom and I drove home to our new apartment, we had moved out of the house. Immediately after Martin's arrest, I thought about the text message that had changed everything. 12 simple words that had brought trained professionals racing to my rescue in the middle of the night. I still had difficult days. Loud noises made me jump. I still had trouble sleeping sometimes. But I was no longer afraid. I knew that there were people watching out for me, people who understood that behind every cry for help is a person worth saving. And I learned something else. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you need help. My phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Jake. "Sleep well, little soldier. We've got your 6." I smiled and showed the message to Mom. She had learned military slang over the past few months, understanding that "we've got your 6" meant they were watching my back. "Always," I texted back. "Thank you for coming to my rescue." "Always," came his immediate reply. "That's what family does." As we pulled into our apartment complex, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete safety. Not just physical safety, but the deeper security that comes from knowing you are not alone in the world, that there are people who will fight for you when you cannot fight for yourself. The clock on our dashboard read 11:47 p.m., exactly the same time this nightmare had begun 6 months earlier. But now, instead of fear, that time brought a sense of peace. I was home. I was safe. And I was surrounded by people who would never let anyone hurt me again. The little girl who had lived in terror was gone. In her place was a survivor, stronger and wiser, who understood that even in the darkest midnight hours, rescue was just a message away.